Hello, so this is my PowerPoint on project-based learning, chapters 3, 4, and 5 of the book. So we're going to start with chapter 3, and some of these slides are very wordy, but I'll just summarize them as best as possible. So the main idea of chapter 3 is it focuses on the big ideas. Teachers need to foster positive mindsets and tap into students' curiosities and interests in order to have the best projects. So I ordered these slides by the sections of the textbook for the most part. So this one's what is most important. Teachers need to focus on the 2 to 3 major ideas that they would like students to know from the class. So if a teacher's thinking about their entire class for the whole year, if they could narrow it down to the 2 or 3 main things they want students to come out knowing from this class, those are the most important ideas that maybe the project should be based around. Another key idea is that they need to reach beyond just the generic info in the textbook to reach those overarching themes and ideas and big points from the class. A good project-based learning teacher learns to use the textbook as a reference instead of their main source of information for students. So instead of going lecture by lecture, taking notes from the textbooks, the students are doing projects outside of the textbook and using the textbook as just a simple reference for pictures and info. So that's a key idea. Good projects connect to the students' experiences and interests. So if a teacher wants to be good at using project-based learning, they need to be really good at tapping into what their students are interested in, what they're curious about, because that makes the students more motivated to explore more. Okay. So next is, what's the big idea? So generally, the idea behind this is that project-based learning doesn't stick to just one discipline. So it's not just science, it's not just math, it's not just English. If you are using project-based learning effectively, it overlaps disciplines. It's interdisciplinary, which means not only maybe the project will center around science or earth science, plate tectonics, but throughout the project, they're writing papers, they're reading papers, they're doing community outreach and involving other people, they're collaborating, they're doing math equations to learn about plate tectonics. So for a project to be considered good, it's interdisciplinary. The next idea is that you need to use colleagues to your advantage when deciding on what the big ideas are. So the book suggests brainstorming with colleagues in your grade level, different grade levels, different teachers, to help kind of track where these big ideas are coming from. It helps to scroll through the table of contents in the textbook, look through the Common Core state standards. A really good idea that I liked was different grade level teachers. So as a future 7th grade science teacher, it would be very beneficial for me to collaborate with maybe an 8th grade science teacher, and take learning from both those grades and incorporate them into one big project, which would help the 8th graders recall the information they learned from 7th grade and further cement that learning, which is a great idea. Okay, so I just put a little picture of what project-based learning is generally. Okay, so next in the chapter, this section says planning for rigor and digital age skills. So to ensure that your project is hard enough and has a good amount of rigor, a project must employ the higher order categories of Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. And that's a mouthful. So I put a picture of what the order of Bloom's taxonomy is. And they say that for a project to be a better project, it needs to employ the higher orders, specifically the ones I bulleted in green. So we have remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. And so these last 3 that are in green, although all of them have their own purposes, these last 3 are very important in project-based learning, because the book says that these 3 higher categories, allow people to examine, explain, investigate, evaluate. They judge, they select, they decide, they justify their answers, as opposed to just recalling information and spitting out that information on a multiple choice test or an essay. The analyzing and evaluating and creating something new is what's really needed in a project. they used a very good example about a traditional biography assignment, where a student would study a famous person from the past and write a report on them. But if we're using those higher order categories as analyzing, evaluating, creating, not only would they study one person, they may study 2 or 3 people from the same category or discipline in history, and then decide which one they would induct into the Hall of Fame and justify their answer and create an art aspect where they create a design for the Hall of Fame and all of that. So that was a really cool example that I liked. So next, the book talked about learning dispositions and how those are important for project-based learning. So learning dispositions are important traits, attitudes, habits, and feelings that teachers encourage, but you usually can't teach them directly. So examples of important learning dispositions would be confidence, cooperation, motivation, etc., which obviously teachers don't have the ability to teach those things directly because it's not a concrete idea. But through project-based learning, these attitudes and traits are gained through that, and it's really important. The other idea that they had under learning dispositions was the idea of fixed versus growth mindsets and how those are crucial when being applied to project-based learning. So the difference between it is a fixed mindset is they believe that intelligence and smarts are innate in a person. So you're either born smart or you're not smart. There's no in between. And so a person with a fixed mindset during project-based learning may become frustrated really easily and shut down because they equate difficulty with failure, and they'll just start thinking that, oh, well, it would come easily if I was smart, so I must just not be smart, and then they'll shut down. And that's not good when it comes to project-based learning, because the idea behind project-based learning is that you go through cycles of failures and you recreate and you reinvent. When you come to a halt in your progress, then you have to redesign your project and go from there. And so a person with a growth mindset tends to believe that your intelligence or your smarts come from hard work. And so during project-based learning, people with growth mindsets find struggle easier to accept, and they'll probably prosper more. So it's really important that teachers foster a growth mindset by encouraging determination, and instead of praising smarts, they praise a student's effort, like, oh, you must have worked very hard on that. And another thing is grit and self-control. So grit just simply means that they have a sustained effort in long-term goals, which is good for projects. And self-control is you manage your impulses in the presence of temptation or distraction. So those are important. So the essential learning functions, they listed 6 in the book, I believe. And the first one is research. Pretty self-explanatory. So they need to research during the project, making ideas visible, using their observations and other data, using stuff like Google Forms can make all of their data and their project learning visible to them instead of just being in their head. Collaboration, self-explanatory, it means you work with partners and other people. Project management, those are technology tools on the computer that can eliminate shuffling papers around. You can just store it in Google Drive with all your partner members. Reflection and iteration is just going in a cycle and using those cycles to reflect and improve upon your study. And then supported studies, just learning resources that help students study better. Oh, and then when planning your own project, be prepared to revise as many times as necessary. So as a teacher, you need to be ready to revise. So chapter 4, I gotta go fast. Main idea is design projects carefully and make sure to avoid pitfalls. So overcoming pitfalls, you need to, when you're looking for a project in your class, you need to look past the facade of all the dazzling technology they may use and instead look for the potential student experience. So are the learning goals that you want addressed in this project, will it make them better learners? Do they collaborate with peers? So like stuff like that is what you need to be looking for when you look for a potential project. So some potential problems teachers might incur is if a project has a lot of activity but no learning involved in it, that's not good. Technology used with traditional practices, for example, if you told a student to use a PowerPoint and then present it to class, that's just a fancy research project. It's not really what we want in project-based learning. It's not that good. Another thing is meaningless thematic units, which is just, you want to make sure you're reaching more than just using an ocean theme for math, science, and English. You want to intersperse them all together, and you want to look outside of that and involve worldview, politics, civics, community outreach, stuff like that. You want to avoid overly scripted projects or ones that have too many steps, because generally that restricts learning and the outcomes will be limited or predictable. So be critical when you pick those ones. If a project has little opportunity for formative assessment, that means that it's not going to work properly. Most students will just wait till the last minute to do it, and that's not a good idea. There's no set milestones to keep students motivated. And if the assessment doesn't feel authentic or feels like there's no point in assessing after, then maybe that project's not the best idea. Okay, so this is a list of the best project features, and a lot of these overlap with just a lot of the other ideas in these 3 chapters. So projects that are great have flexible designs that offer like different learning paths for different students. They're generative, making students inquire about things. They're focused around one central question. They're real life student interests. They're stuff that's happening that will capture their interest. It's interdisciplinary, so it's realistic. They reach beyond just the scope of the classroom, meaning like you'll go outside into the community. Students learn how to utilize data. They work together. They go through cycles. And it also allows for public sharing to an audience or presentations, stuff like that. So those are good projects. Project ideas often come from news stories, contemporary issues such as politics. Maybe you got one from another teacher. Really tap into student interest when it comes to where you pick a project from, or maybe a classroom irritant such as using cell phones in class could turn into a project. Designing your own project, you want to go through and do a rough draft of the learning objectives and dispositions and then finalize that list. And then you want to decide what students should have learned by the end. Then you choose a theme, and at that point you plan a hook to introduce the students to the project, which is the hard part. And then you would write a sketch and get feedback on that. Okay, so Chapter 5, making meaningful assessments. So the main idea is assessments do not need to be daunting if they're planned properly. So at the end of the project, we have the summative assessment, and there are 2 main reasons for that, which is measuring student understanding, and you also want to evaluate the quality of the project so you can improve for the next one. And then there's also formative assessments, which are just check-ins throughout the project. So plans for summative assessments, they could be essays, tests, just traditional. You could grade off a rubric. There could be a performance task, which you would have to apply your learning to a new task, and then you would have to maybe present it to an audience, or asking experts or colleagues to evaluate the student's work. So when you're selecting these performance tasks, you want to blend old strategies with new ones. So you could use maybe like one traditional test, but then in addition you would have a performance task with it, or you would have to have them create something new. You want to model real world assessments, which would be maybe having experts, like if you had them make their own comic book, you would have an expert comic book person come in and give them critiques. You could also have them submit to publication or submit to a contest, which would really motivate them, or just simply fostering a discussion and asking what they've learned and talking to them about it. Okay, so formative assessment is the check-ins throughout the project. So you want to set milestones. This helps students chunk the work into manageable parts instead of just having them have this huge daunting project in front of them. It also offers time to reteach and redirect if you see that students may be going down the wrong path. And it ensures better quality of work because they know that they have to turn in certain parts of the work at a certain time instead of wasting it till the last minute. You also want to plan regular check-ins, which is similar to milestones, and it helps students not procrastinate. And you want to be flexible and use any opportunity to check in with students during the project. So you could use checklists that are on Google Drive or around the classroom. You could have exit slips sometimes where they have to fill out a form before they leave, or an interest inventory, which is just like a Google Doc where you survey students' interests and see what they want to do projects about. So these are all ways to do formative assessments and how you want to do projects. And these are my references. Sorry, I went very fast at the end. Running out of time.